They say a woman's scream is loud, but the silence of a mafia boss is deafening. I was being strangled in the middle of a shopping mall, my daughter's tears hitting the floor, while a crowd of strangers held up their phones to record my death. My ex-husband thought he was untouchable. He didn't see the man in the charcoal suit watching him with eyes like black ice. Adrien didn't know that I had just been claimed. He didn't know that by touching me, he had just declared war on the Korean Mafia. In the next 60 seconds, you will see a monster meet a king. And trust me, the king does not believe in second chances. The air in the Westfield Mall was thick with the smell of expensive coffee and the sound of casual chatter, a stark contrast to the lightning bolt of terror shooting through Adrien's veins. She moved like a ghost through the crowd, her hand a frantic anchor for her daughter, Nikia. Every shadow looked like him. Every loud laugh sounded like his rage. "Mommy, can we get the shoes now? You promised." Nikia's voice was small, innocent, and completely unaware that they were being hunted. "Soon, baby. Just keep walking," Adrien whispered, her eyes darting toward the exit. She had a restraining order, a thin piece of paper that felt like a joke against a man who enjoyed breaking things. The nightmare materialized in an instant. A shadow eclipsed the sun coming through the mall's glass ceiling, and a hand, heavy, scarred, and familiar, clamped onto Adrien's shoulder. Adrien didn't say a word at first. He just spun her around, his face a mask of alcoholic fury. As his hand moved from her shoulder to her throat, pinning her against a storefront, the world around them stopped. But no one stepped forward. In a terrifying display of modern apathy, the shoppers didn't call for help. They pulled out their phones. Adrien was dying in high definition, her struggle becoming entertainment for the masses. "You thought you were free," Adrien hissed, his grip tightening until Adrien's world began to splinter into sparks of light. "I own you. I'll always own you." Nikia dropped to the floor, her small hands pulling at Adrien's jeans, her screams of "Daddy, please," echoing off the marble walls. Amidst the sea of glowing phone screens, one man stood still. Byung Chul Yu looked less like a shopper and more like an omen of death. He stood 10 feet away, his presence so heavy it seemed to suck the sound out of the room. With a chilling mechanical calmness, he reached up and began to slide his heavy silver rings off his fingers. Each ring hit his pocket with a soft clink, the sound of a man preparing to get blood on his hands. He adjusted his platinum watch, checked his cuffs, and stepped forward. "Remove your hands," Byung Chul said. His voice wasn't a shout, it was a vibration that shook the very air. Adrien, blinded by his own ego, didn't even look back. "Keep walking, suit, unless you want to die for her." Byung Chul's eyes didn't blink. He closed the gap in 2 silent strides. Before the crowd could even gasp, Byung Chul's hand shot out like a viper, grabbing Adrien's wrist. There was a sickening, wet crack as the bones snapped under the mafia boss's grip. Adrien's scream was the most satisfying sound Adrien had ever heard. His grip on her throat vanished as he collapsed, his shattered wrist held against his chest. Adrien fell to her knees, gasping for the air she thought she'd never taste again. Byung Chul didn't acknowledge the crowd or the man groveling in pain. He knelt in front of Adrien, his shadow covering her completely. He took her chin in his hand, forcing her to look into eyes that held 1,000 secrets. "He was wrong," Byung Chul whispered, loud enough for only her to hear. "You don't belong to a coward. You belong to the king." Byung Chul stood up and dropped a blackened gold card onto Adrien's chest. It was the mark of the dragon. Adrien watched as 2 mountain-sized men in black suits stepped from the shadows to drag Adrien away like trash. She was safe, but as she looked at the card in her hand, she realized she hadn't just been rescued. She had been recruited into a world where mercy didn't exist. The ride away from the Westfield Mall was silent, save for the hum of the Mercedes-Benz S-Class engine and the ragged, uneven breathing of Adrien. She sat in the plush leather backseat, her body still vibrating with a primal terror, while Nikia slept fitfully against her side, exhausted from the trauma. Next to her sat Byung Chul Yu. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring out the tinted window, his hands, now adorned again with those heavy silver rings, resting calmly on his knees. "Where are you taking us?" Adrien finally whispered, her voice cracking against the bruises on her throat. Byung Chul didn't turn his head, but his jaw tightened. "To a place where men like D'Andre do not exist," he replied. His tone wasn't kind, it was absolute. It was the tone of a man who didn't ask for permission, only for obedience. Adrien looked at the black business card still clutched in her hand. The gold dragon seemed to shimmer in the passing streetlights, a symbol of a protector who felt just as dangerous as the predator he had just broken. The car pulled up to a massive iron gate on the outskirts of the city. Behind the walls stood a sprawling estate of glass and dark stone that looked more like a fortress than a home. As they stepped out, Adrien saw men in suits, identical to the ones at the mall, standing at every corner of the property. They didn't look at her. They bowed their heads as Byung Chul walked past. This was his kingdom, and she was entering it not as a guest, but as something he had claimed from the wreckage of a mall floor. "You will stay in the East Wing," Byung Chul stated, finally looking at her. His eyes scanned the purple marks on her neck, and for a split second, a flash of pure, unadulterated rage flickered in his pupils. "A doctor is waiting. Do not leave the room unless my men accompany you." "Are we prisoners?" Adrien asked, her protective instincts for Nikia flaring up. Byung Chul stepped closer, his shadow engulfing her. He reached out, his thumb grazing the edge of her jaw just inches away from the bruises. The heat from his skin sent a shiver down her spine that wasn't entirely based on fear. "You are safe," he whispered. "In this world, Adrien, safety and freedom are rarely the same thing. Choose safety." Inside the mansion, the luxury was suffocating. Every vase, every painting, every piece of furniture cost more than Adrien had earned in her entire life. But as the doctor examined her and Nikia was settled into a bedroom filled with toys she had only seen in movies, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a variable in a high-stakes game played by a man who ruled the city's shadows. Late that night, unable to sleep, Adrien wandered into the hallway. The house was quiet, but she felt eyes on her from every security camera. She found herself in a small study, the walls lined with books in Korean and English. On the desk sat a framed photograph, face down. Driven by a curiosity she couldn't suppress, she turned it over. It was a photo of Byung Chul, years younger, smiling, a look that seemed impossible on the man she had met today. Beside him was a woman with radiant skin and a little girl who looked hauntingly like Nikia. "They are gone," a voice boomed from the doorway. Adrien jumped, dropping the photo back onto the desk. Byung Chul stood there, his tie loosened, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked tired, but his presence was still like a loaded gun in the room. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry," Adrien stammered. "They were taken by a man who thought he could use them to hurt me," Byung Chul said, his voice devoid of emotion, which made the words even more terrifying. "He learned very quickly that I do not hurt. I only destroy." He walked toward her, the ice in his glass clinking, a sound that reminded her of the silver rings hitting his pocket at the mall. He stood inches from her, the scent of expensive sandalwood and expensive whiskey surrounding her. "When I saw that man's hand on your throat today, I didn't see a domestic dispute. I saw a debt that the universe owed me." "So I'm just a way for you to feel better about your past?" Adrien asked, her voice gaining a sudden, sharp edge. Byung Chul leaned in, his face inches from hers. "You are the woman I chose to save, and in my world, what I save, I keep. D'Andre is in a cell right now, but he is the least of your worries. His friends in the syndicate are already asking questions about why a mafia king started a mall brawl for a dental receptionist." Adrien felt the blood drain from her face. Syndicate, he was just a drunk. No, Byung Chul said, his eyes turning back into the black ice she saw at the mall. D'Andre was an informant for the rival family, and by crushing his wrist, I just declared a war that will either set you free or bury us both. Suddenly, the mansion's alarm began to wail, a high-pitched, piercing scream that shattered the night. Byung Chul didn't panic. He reached into the desk drawer, pulled out a matte black handgun, and checked the chamber. "Stay behind me," he commanded, grabbing her arm with the same possessive grip that had claimed her earlier. "The war has arrived sooner than expected." The wail of the mansion's alarm wasn't just a sound. It was a physical vibration that rattled Adrien's teeth. In the dim light of the study, Byung Chul stood like a statue of death, the matte black handgun an extension of his arm. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like the monster the underworld feared. "My daughter, I have to get Nikia," Adrien screamed, her voice barely audible over the sirens. She tried to run toward the door, but Byung Chul's hand clamped onto her wrist, the same possessive, iron-tight grip he had used at the mall. "My men are already with her. She is being moved to the panic room," he said, his voice eerily calm amidst the chaos. "If you run out there now, you become a target. Stay behind me." Byung Chul reached for a tablet on the desk. The screen flickered to life, showing multiple angles of the estate's perimeter. 3 black SUVs had smashed through the front gates. Men in tactical gear, carrying submachine guns, were pouring out. This wasn't a random hit. This was a military-grade assassination attempt. Adrien watched the screen in horror as Byung Chul's security team engaged the intruders. Muzzle flashes lit up the night like lethal fireflies. But Byung Chul wasn't looking at the cameras. He was looking at Adrien. With that same slow, ritualistic motion she saw at the mall, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his silver rings, sliding them onto his fingers one by one. "The rings? Why do you put them on now?" Adrien whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "At the mall, I took them off because I didn't want to kill him too quickly," Byung Chul said, his eyes turning into black voids. "Tonight, I put them on because I want everyone who touches this house to feel the weight of my fist before they die." The door to the study burst open. A man in a balaclava lunged forward, his weapon raised. Byung Chul didn't hesitate. 2 muffled thuds echoed through the room, and the intruder collapsed before he could pull the trigger. Byung Chul didn't even flinch. He grabbed Adrien's hand and pulled her into the hallway, moving with the fluid, predatory grace of a man born for violence. They moved through the dark corridors, the smell of gunpowder beginning to fill the air. Every time they turned a corner, Byung Chul was a blur of efficiency, neutralizing threats before Adrien even saw them. He treated her like his most precious possession, shielding her body with his own whenever they passed an open window. "Why are they doing this? Just because of me," Adrien sobbed as they reached the heavy steel door of the panic room. Byung Chul stopped and turned her to face him. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers for a fleeting second. "They are doing this because I broke their informant, but they are also doing this because they know you are my weakness now, Adrien." "I'm not your weakness. I'm just a woman you saved." "In my world, there is no such thing as just a woman," Byung Chul hissed. "You are the only person who has seen me remove my rings and walk away. That makes you the most dangerous person in the city." The steel door hissed open. Inside, Nikia was huddled on a sofa, surrounded by 2 heavily armed guards. She shrieked, "Mommy!" and flew into Adrien's arms. Adrien held her tight, the cold reality of their new life sinking in. They were safe, but they were inside a vault, buried under a mountain of mafia money and blood. Byung Chul stood at the threshold. He didn't enter. "Where are you going?" Adrien asked, fear clawing at her throat again. I have to finish this, he said. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small, old locket. He tossed it to Adrien. Inside was the same photo she had seen earlier, his wife and daughter. I failed them because I tried to be a businessman, Byung Chul said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low frequency. I will not fail you, because tonight I am only the Mafia Boss. The door slammed shut, locking Adrien and Nikia inside the soundproof chamber. On the monitors inside the panic room, Adrien watched as Byung Chul walked back into the darkness of his mansion. She saw him on the screen, a ghost in a charcoal suit. The attackers thought they were the hunters, but as Byung Chul moved through the shadows, they realized their mistake. One by one, the red dots on the security map vanished. There were no more gunshots, just the silent, lethal efficiency of a man who had reclaimed his throne. 2 hours later, the door opened. Byung Chul stood there, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt stained with a spray of blood that wasn't his. He was breathing heavily, his silver rings glinting in the harsh light of the panic room. He walked toward Adrien and Nikia. He didn't say a word. He simply knelt down and placed his hand over Adrien, his rings cold against her skin. It's over, he whispered. Is D'Andre dead? Adrien asked, her heart stopping. Byung Chul looked at her with an expression that made her blood run cold. No, death is too easy for a man who touched what belongs to me. D'Andre is in my basement. And tomorrow, Adrien, you are going to help me decide his fate. Adrien gasped. The victim was being asked to become the judge. Would she keep her humanity, or would she become the mafia queen Byung Chul wanted her to be? The basement of the mansion didn't smell like a home. It smelled of damp concrete, ozone, and a metallic tang that made Adrien's stomach churn. The silence down here was different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of the bedrooms above. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. Byung Chul walked ahead of her, his footsteps echoing like a ticking clock. He had changed into a fresh white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were built for more than just signing contracts. On his fingers, the silver rings glinted under the flickering overhead lights, the same rings that had shattered her ex-husband's wrist at the mall. You don't have to do this, Byung Chul said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly tone. He stopped in front of a heavy steel door and turned to look at her. But if you don't face the monster today, he will live in your nightmares forever. I am giving you back your power, Adrien. Byung Chul pushed the door open. Inside, illuminated by a single, harsh bulb, was D'Andre. He was strapped to a chair, his arm in a crude sling, his face a mosaic of bruises and dried blood. The man who had looked so terrifying at the mall, the man who had crushed Adrien's throat in front of their daughter, now looked like a shivering animal. When D'Andre saw Adrien, his eyes widened with a mix of hope and cowardice. Adrien, please, tell him to let me go. I'm sorry. I was drunk, baby, you know how I get. Adrien felt a surge of nausea. For years, those words, I'm sorry, I was drunk, had been her prison. They were the words that followed every bruise, every broken plate, every night spent crying in the bathroom. Byung Chul stepped into D'Andre's line of sight. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't yell. He didn't even raise his hand. He simply stood there, an overwhelming force of nature. You touched her throat, Byung Chul said, his voice as smooth as velvet and as sharp as a razor. You made her child beg for her mother's life. In my world, that is a debt that cannot be paid with an apology. Byung Chul reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. He opened it to reveal a set of brass knuckles, custom-made and etched with the same dragon that was on his business card. He began to slide them over his rings, a ritual of impending violence that made D'Andre sob openly. Wait, Adrien shouted, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. Byung Chul stopped, his fist halfway to Andre's jaw. He turned his head slowly, his eyes questioning. You want to show him mercy after what he did to you, after what he did to Nikia? Adrien walked forward until she was standing directly in front of Andre. For the first time in 7 years, she didn't feel the paralyzing fear. She felt a cold, hard clarity. She looked at the man who had tried to kill her, and then she looked at the man who was offering to kill for her. If you kill him, you're just doing what he did, Adrien whispered, her eyes locked on Byung Chul. You're using your strength to break someone weaker. I don't want his blood on my hands, and I don't want it on yours. Byung Chul's expression softened, but his grip on the brass knuckles didn't loosen. He is an informant for the syndicate, Adrien. If he walks out of here, he goes back to the people who tried to storm this house last night. He is a loose end. Then don't let him walk out, Adrien said, a new strength in her voice. But don't kill him. Give him to the police. Give them the evidence of his syndicate ties. Let him rot in a cell where he can never touch us again. Andre started to thank her, but Byung Chul silenced him with a single, icy glare. He turned back to Adrien, his face inches from hers. You are too good for this world, Adrien, but that is why I chose you. Byung Chul signaled to his guards. They unstrapped Andre, but instead of taking him to the police, they dragged him toward a different part of the basement. Where are they taking him? Adrien asked, her suspicion rising. To a federal contact, Byung Chul lied easily, though the darkness in his eyes suggested a much grimmer fate. He took Adrien's hand, his silver rings pressing into her skin. He will never be a problem again. I promise you that on my life. As they walked back upstairs, the mansion felt different. The gilded cage was becoming a sanctuary, but at what cost? Adrien realized that every time Byung Chul protected her, he was weaving another thread of his world around her, making it impossible for her to ever leave. When they reached the main hall, Byung Chul stopped her. There is one more thing, he said. He handed her a newspaper from that morning. On the front page was a photo of the mall confrontation, but the headline made her heart stop. Mysterious Savior Revealed as Scion of Yu Crime Family. The world knows who I am now, Byung Chul said, his voice dropping to a whisper. And they know you are the woman I exposed myself for. You can never go back to your old life, Adrien. There is no dental office, no small apartment. You are the queen of this house now, whether you want to be or not. Suddenly, the front doors burst open. It wasn't gunmen this time. It was the police, led by a detective who looked like he had been waiting 10 years to put Byung Chul behind bars. Byung Chul Yu, you're under arrest for the kidnapping of Adrien and Nikia, the detective shouted. Adrien gasped. Was the detective her real savior, or was he just another player in a game she didn't understand? The grand foyer of the mansion, which had felt like a sanctuary only moments ago, was now flooded with the harsh, strobing blue and red lights of police cruisers. Detective Miller, a man with a face like weathered stone and eyes that had seen too much of the city's filth, stepped forward, his hand resting on his holster. Behind him, a dozen officers stood with their weapons drawn, their shadows stretching long and jagged across the marble floor. Step away from the woman, you, Miller barked, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. We have a witness statement saying you took her from the mall by force. Kidnapping carries a heavy price, even for someone like you. Byung Chul didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon, and he didn't raise his hands in surrender. Instead, he slowly reached into his pocket. The police officers flinched, their fingers tightening on their triggers, but Byung Chul merely pulled out his silk handkerchief and wiped a speck of dust from his silver rings. The utter calm he displayed in the face of a dozen guns was more terrifying than any shout. Detective, Byung Chul said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. You are trespassing on private property. As for Ms. Adrien, she is not my prisoner. She is my guest. Guest, Miller sneered, looking at Adrien. Adrien, look at me. You don't have to be afraid anymore. We saw the footage of the mall. We know he's a monster. Just walk toward us and this all ends. Adrien stood frozen between the two worlds. On one side was the law, the people who were supposed to protect her but had failed her for 7 years. On the other side was a man who lived outside the law, a man who had broken bones to save her, but who also treated her like a prize he had won in a war. She felt Byung Chul's hand release her arm. The choice is yours, Adrien, he whispered, so low the police couldn't hear. Go with them, and you go back to the world that watched you be strangled and did nothing. Stay with me, and you become the most hunted woman in this city, but you will never be touched again. Adrien looked at Detective Miller, then at the bruised skin on her own neck. She remembered the mall, the phones recording, the laughter of the crowd, the indifference of the security guards. Then she remembered Byung Chul's silver rings glinting as he removed the man who was killing her. She took a step, but not toward the police. She stepped closer to Byung Chul. He didn't kidnap me, Adrien said, her voice growing stronger with every word. He saved my life. Where were you, detective, when Andre was breaking my ribs 6 months ago? Where was your squad when he violated the restraining order for the 10th time? The foyer went deathly silent. Miller's face turned a deep, angry red. He's a criminal, Adrien. He's using you. He's the only one who didn't look away, Adrien countered, her hand instinctively reaching out to touch Byung Chul's sleeve. Byung Chul's legal team arrived within minutes, a fleet of black sedans carrying the most expensive lawyers in the country. The arrest turned into a stalemate, because Adrien refused to press charges, and because Andre's history of violence was well documented, the police were forced to retreat, but not before Miller leaned in close to Byung Chul. This isn't over, you, Miller hissed. I'll find a way to take everything you love, and I'll start with her. As the police left, the tension didn't evaporate, it shifted. Byung Chul turned to Adrien, his expression unreadable. You shouldn't have done that, he said. Why, I told the truth, Adrien said. The truth is a luxury we can no longer afford, Byung Chul replied. He led her back into the study, locking the door behind them. He pulled a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a bank of monitors she hadn't seen before. They weren't showing the mansion. They were showing Detective Miller, in a meeting with the same syndicate leaders who had attacked the house. Miller isn't just a cop, Byung Chul explained, his eyes fixed on the screen. He's on their payroll. He didn't come here to save you. He came here to take you back to them so they could use you as leverage to make me surrender my territories. Adrien felt the world spin. The line between good guys and bad guys had completely vanished. In this city, the law was just another weapon for the Mafia. So what do we do? She asked, a sense of hopelessness washing over her. Byung Chul walked to her, his presence overwhelming the small room. He took both of her hands in his, the silver rings pressing firmly into her palms. We stop running. Tonight, the dragon wakes up. I'm going to dismantle their entire operation, brick by brick. But to do that, I need you to do something you've never done before. What? Adrien whispered. Byung Chul pulled a small, elegant black dress from a box on the desk. Beside it was a mask made of silver lace. The syndicate is holding an auction tonight at the Black Pearl Lounge, Byung Chul said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. They think I'm hiding you. I want you to walk into that room on my arm. I want them to see exactly who you belong to. We aren't going to hide anymore, Adrien. We're going to show them that anyone who touches the king's woman dies in the light. Adrien looked at the dress. It wasn't just clothes. It was a uniform for a war she was finally ready to fight. But as she reached for it, she saw a message flash on Byung Chul's phone. It was a photo of Nikia's bedroom, and a red laser dot was resting right on her daughter's pillow. The red laser dot on the phone screen felt like a bullet through Adrien's heart. It was a message that didn't need words. We can touch her whenever we want. Adrien's knees buckled, but Byung Chul caught her before she hit the floor. His grip wasn't just supportive, it was possessive, his silver rings cold against her skin. He didn't gasp. He didn't panic. He simply stared at the image of the laser on Nikia's pillow with a gaze that could have frozen the sun. "They are in the house," Adrien choked out, her voice a thin thread of terror. "No," Byung Chul said, his voice dropping to a frequency that made the glass on the desk vibrate. "That photo was taken from a drone through the window. It took them 3 seconds to send it, and it will take me 3 hours to erase the bloodline of the man who ordered it." He turned Adrien to face the mirror. "Put on the dress," he commanded. "Tonight you are not the victim from the mall. You are the reason the syndicate falls. If you look afraid, they win. If you look like a queen, they tremble." An hour later, Adrien emerged. The black silk dress hugged her curves like a second skin, the silver lace mask hiding the fear in her eyes, but highlighting the fire that had begun to burn in their depths. Byung Chul stood by the door, dressed in a tuxedo so sharp it looked like a weapon. He reached out and fastened a diamond choker around her neck. It felt like a collar, a beautiful, expensive mark of ownership. "Tonight, everyone will know," he whispered into her ear, his breath hot against her skin. "You belong to the dragon, and the dragon does not share." The Black Pearl Lounge was the epicenter of the city's underworld, a place where politicians shook hands with assassins. When the heavy oak doors opened and Byung Chul Yu walked in with Adrien on his arm, the music didn't stop, but the atmosphere suffocated. The possessive romance hook was on full display. Byung Chul kept his hand firmly on the small of Adrien's back, guiding her through the sea of predators like she was the most precious and most dangerous object in the room. Every eye was on them. They saw the bruises on her neck peeking out from the diamond choker, and they saw the way the Mafia Boss looked at her, not with love, but with a terrifying, protective obsession. In the center of the lounge sat Victor Thorne, the head of the syndicate, and the man who had likely ordered the drone to Nikia's window. Beside him stood Detective Miller, no longer in uniform, looking like a lapdog for the mob. "Byung Chul," Thorne drawled, swirling a glass of 30-year-old scotch. "I see you've brought the little girl from the mall. Quite a lot of trouble for a common waitress, isn't it?" Byung Chul didn't answer immediately. He led Adrien to a chair, waited for her to sit, and then turned to Thorne. With a slow, rhythmic motion that silenced the entire room, Byung Chul began to slide his silver rings off his fingers, placing them one by one on the table in front of Thorne. Clink, clink, clink. "You sent a drone to a child's window," Byung Chul said, his voice as calm as a cemetery at midnight. "In our world, Victor, we kill each other. We do not threaten children. You have broken the only rule that kept you alive." Thorne laughed, but it was hollow. "And what are you going to do? You're outnumbered and outgunned in my house." "Am I?" Byung Chul asked. He looked at his watch. Suddenly, every phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. Thorne's face went pale as he looked at his screen. One by one, the live feeds of his warehouses, his ships, and his offshore bank accounts were showing the same thing: flames. "I didn't come here to negotiate, Victor," Byung Chul said, leaning over the table, his eyes boring into Thorne's soul. "I came here to watch you realize that you lost everything the moment you touched her throat." Detective Miller panicked. He pulled his gun, aiming it straight at Adrien's head. "Nobody moves. You, tell your men to stop or the girl dies right now. Adrien didn't flinch. She looked Miller in the eye, the fear she had felt at the mall replaced by a cold, mafia-hardened resolve. You're a coward, Miller, she said, her voice echoing in the silent lounge. You couldn't protect me as a cop and you can't kill me as a criminal, because you're already dead. Before Miller could process her words, a red laser dot appeared on his forehead. Not from a drone, but from a sniper positioned in the rafters. Byung Chul stood up, reclaimed his rings, and slid them back onto his fingers. He reached out his hand to Adrien. The lounge is surrounded, Byung Chul announced to the room of stunned criminals. Anyone who wants to live has 10 seconds to walk out. Anyone who stays is choosing Thorne's fate. As the room descended into a chaotic scramble for the exits, Thorne grabbed a knife from the table and lunged at Byung Chul. Adrien didn't scream. She did something she never thought she'd do. She grabbed a heavy glass decanter from the side table and smashed it across Thorne's head, sending him sprawling. Byung Chul looked at her, a dark, proud smile touching his lips. "That's my queen," he whispered. But as they prepared to leave, a massive explosion rocked the building. The syndicate had a fail-safe. If Thorne couldn't have the city, no one would. The ceiling began to collapse, and Byung Chul threw his body over Adrien. As the world went black. The world didn't return in colors. It returned in the smell of pulverized marble, expensive smoke, and the copper tang of blood. Adrien opened her eyes to see nothing but a haze of gray dust. Her ears were ringing with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the screams of the dying. She tried to move, but she was pinned down, not by debris, but by the heavy, motionless body of Byung Chul Yu. He had shielded her with his own frame when the ceiling collapsed, taking the full force of the falling stone and fire. "Byung Chul," she wheezed, her lungs burning from the dust. "Byung Chul, wake up." With a groan that sounded like grinding tectonic plates, the Mafia boss shifted. He pushed himself up, his charcoal suit shredded, his white shirt soaked crimson. His silver rings were dull, coated in a layer of gray ash. As he looked at her, Adrien saw something she had never seen in his eyes before: vulnerability. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a raspy shadow of its former authority. He didn't check himself for injuries. He immediately began checking her face, her arms, and her hands, his touch trembling despite the iron strength he usually possessed. "I'm fine, but you're bleeding," Adrien cried, grabbing his arm. "It doesn't matter," he hissed, forcing himself to stand. He scanned the ruins of the lounge. Victor Thorne was gone, either buried under the rubble or escaped through the back. The syndicate's fail-safe had turned the luxury lounge into a mass grave. "We have to move. Miller's men and the syndicate remnants will be closing in to finish what the blast started." The possession hook takes a dramatic turn here. For the first time, Adrien isn't just the one being saved. She becomes the pillar of support. Byung Chul stumbled, his internal injuries clearly severe. Adrien wrapped his massive arm around her shoulder, her small frame straining under his weight. "I've got you," she whispered. "Just like you had me at the mall, we're getting out of here." As they struggled through the wreckage, they found Detective Miller. He wasn't dead. He was pinned under a fallen support beam, his legs crushed, his gun just inches out of reach. When he saw them, his face twisted into a mask of pathetic desperation. "You help me," Miller choked out. "I can give you Thorne. I can give you the names of everyone on the payroll. Just don't leave me here to burn." Byung Chul stopped. He looked down at the man who had tried to facilitate the kidnapping of his daughter and the murder of the woman he claimed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out one of his silver rings, the one he had used to break Andre's wrist. He didn't help Miller. He didn't kill him. He simply dropped the ring onto the floor in front of the detective. A king doesn't negotiate with rats, Byung Chul said, his voice cold enough to extinguish the surrounding fires. That ring is worth more than your life. Use it to buy your soul back in the next world. They left Miller screaming in the dark. The karma hook was complete. The man who betrayed his badge was left to the mercy of the ruins he helped create. They reached the alleyway behind the lounge, where Byung Chul's secondary extraction team was waiting. In the backseat of the armored SUV, as a medic worked feverishly to stop Byung Chul's bleeding, he grabbed Adrien's hand. "Adrien, there is something you need to know," he said, his breathing shallow. "Thorn didn't target you because of the mall. He targeted you because of who you are." Adrien's heart stopped. "What do you mean? I'm just a dental receptionist from the suburbs." Byung Chul pulled a crumpled, old document from his inner pocket, one he had recovered from Thorn's private safe before the explosion. "Your father wasn't who you thought he was. He was the bookkeeper for the old Korean syndicate. He vanished 20 years ago with the ledger that could bury every crime family in this city." "The ledger," Adrien whispered, the world spinning. "I don't know anything about a ledger." "I know," Byung Chul said, coughing up blood. "But they think you do, and more importantly, they think the ledger is the reason I saved you. They think I'm using you to find the key to the city." "Is that why?" Adrien asked, her voice trembling. "Did you save me for a ledger? Was the mall just a setup?" Byung Chul looked her in the eyes, and for the first time a single tear tracked through the blood and ash on his face. "At first, yes, but when I saw you clawing at his hands, when I saw Nikia, I didn't see a ledger. I saw the family I failed to protect. I didn't save you to find the key, Adrien. I saved you because you are the only thing worth protecting." Suddenly, the SUV was rammed from the side by a heavy-duty truck. The vehicle spun, flipping twice before landing on its roof. Through the shattered window, Adrien saw boots approaching. Not the polished shoes of the Mafia, and not the tactical boots of the police. These were different. A voice echoed in the night, a voice Adrien hadn't heard in 2 decades. "You did well, Byung Chul. You kept her safe for me. Now give me my daughter." Adrien gasped as a man stepped into the light. He looked exactly like the father she thought had died 20 years ago, but he wasn't holding a bookkeeper's pen. He was holding a gold-plated submachine gun. The belongs to Hook just got more complicated. Adrien didn't belong to the Mafia Boss or her ex-husband. She belonged to a ghost who had come back to claim his throne. The world was upside down. Adrien hung by her seatbelt, the scent of leaking gasoline filling the cabin of the overturned SUV. Next to her, Byung Chul was unconscious, a fresh gash on his forehead bleeding into his eyes. Outside, the silhouette of her father, the man she had grieved for 20 years, stood like a vengeful specter in the moonlight. "Dad," Adrien choked out, the word feeling like ash in her mouth. The man, Elias, stepped closer, his gold-plated submachine gun glinting. He didn't look like the gentle bookkeeper who used to read her bedtime stories. His face was a map of scars, his eyes cold and devoid of the warmth she remembered. "I had to stay dead, Adrien," Elias said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "The ledger I took, it was the only thing keeping you alive. As long as they thought I was dead and the ledger was lost, they left you alone. But then this suit," he spat, gesturing toward the unconscious Byung Chul, "decided to play hero at a mall and put your face on every news channel in the country." He signaled the world that the prize was back on the table. Elias reached through the shattered window and sliced Adrien's seatbelt. She tumbled out of the vehicle, landing hard on the asphalt. He didn't help her up. Instead, he pointed his weapon at Byung Chul's head. "He didn't save you for love, Adrien. He's a you. He saved you to lure me out. He knew if he claimed you, I'd have to come for you. He's using you as bait for the ledger," Elias hissed. Adrien looked from her father to Byung Chul. The possession hook had reached its darkest point. Was she just a piece of paper to all of them? A ledger to her father, a lure to the mafia boss, a punching bag to her ex. Suddenly, a hand clamped onto Elias' ankle. Byung Chul wasn't unconscious. He was waiting. In one explosive movement, he dragged Elias' leg out from under him. As her father fell, Byung Chul surged out of the wreckage, his silver rings glinting like daggers. "I didn't use her as bait," Byung Chul roared, his voice sounding like it was torn from the depths of hell. "I used myself as a shield." The two men collided, the ghost of the past and the king of the present. It was a brutal, primal fight. Byung Chul, weakened by the explosion and the crash, used every ounce of his remaining strength. Elias, fueled by 20 years of hiding, fought with the desperation of a man who had already lost his soul. Adrien saw the gold-plated gun slide across the pavement toward her. She looked at the two men. Her father, who had abandoned her to a life of poverty and abuse to protect a book of secrets. And Byung Chul, the man who had claimed her, protected her, and was now bleeding out to keep her safe. She grabbed the gun. "Stop!" she screamed, firing a burst into the air. Both men froze. Elias looked at her, a twisted smile on his face. "That's my girl. Kill him, Adrien. Kill the mafia boss who turned you into a target. We'll take the ledger and go." Byung Chul didn't say anything. He just looked at her, his eyes filled with a quiet, tragic acceptance. He knelt on the ground, his silver rings resting on his knees, and lowered his head. He was giving her the choice he had promised her since the mall: freedom. "You're wrong, Dad," Adrien said, her voice echoing with a power she had never known. "You didn't stay dead to protect me. You stayed dead to protect the ledger. You let me grow up with a monster like D'Andre because you were too busy playing with your secrets." She turned the gun, but not toward Byung Chul. She pointed it at the ledger, a small, encrypted hard drive that had fallen out of her father's pocket during the struggle. "No," Elias screamed. Adrien pulled the trigger. The drive shattered into 1,000 pieces, the secrets of the syndicate erased forever in a spray of sparks and plastic. "Now," Adrien said, her eyes burning with a cold fire, "there is no ledger, there is no prize, there is only me." Elias fell to his knees, staring at the ruined drive. He had sacrificed everything for that data, and in a second, his daughter had rendered his 20-year exile meaningless. He looked up at her, seeing not a victim, but a woman who had finally claimed herself. "Go," Adrien commanded, "before I let the dragon finish what you started." Elias fled into the shadows, a broken man with nothing left to hide. Adrien dropped the gun and rushed to Byung Chul. She cradled his head in her lap, wiping the blood from his brow. "Why did you destroy it?" he whispered, his voice fatting. "That was your leverage. You could have bought your way out of my world with that." Adrien leaned down, her lips brushing his ear. The belongs to Hook was finally resolved, but not in the way the audience expected. "I don't want out," she whispered. "The mall showed me that the world is full of people who watch. You're the only one who acted. I don't belong to a ledger and I don't belong to a father. I belong right here." 6 months later, the Westfield Mall had been bought and demolished. In its place stood the Adrien Foundation for Women and Children. Byung Chul stood on the balcony of his mansion, his silver rings back on his fingers, watching Nikia play in the garden with a litter of golden retriever puppies. Behind him, Adrien emerged, dressed in a suit as sharp and expensive as his own. She wasn't a receptionist anymore. She was the strategist, the heart, and the iron fist of the new Yu empire. Byung Chul reached out, taking her hand. He didn't just hold it. He kissed the silver ring he had placed on her finger, a ring that matched his own. "Are they ready?" Adrien asked, checking her watch. The last of the syndicate leaders are waiting in the basement, Byung Chul replied, a dark, satisfied smile on his face. What is the verdict, my queen? Adrien looked out at her daughter, then back at the man who had saved her. Her eyes turned as cold and beautiful as the diamonds around her neck. No mercy, she said. When they touched me, they chose their fate. Let's show them what happens when you cross the dragon's family. As they walked inside, the heavy iron doors closed with a final, echoing thud. The world thought she was a victim. The world was wrong. She was the one holding the rings now. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and ultimate protection, hit that like button and subscribe to join our inner circle. We bring you the most intense stories of power, revenge, and loyalty every single day.